My husband left me during pregnancy complications to marry his ex who has cancer because she wants to die as his wife, not his ex. He said our baby could wait but she couldn't. When I went into early labor alone, he texted can't come, at the wedding. I delivered our premature son by myself while he was saying vows to another woman. I'm Rachel, 29, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage with my husband David, 32. We'd been together for 4 years, married for 2, and we're expecting our first child, a son we'd already named Oliver. I'm currently 34 weeks pregnant, and this pregnancy has been classified as high risk due to placenta previa, which means I've been on modified bed rest and need constant monitoring. David and I met 5 years ago through mutual friends. He was kind, attentive, and seemed genuinely excited about starting a family together. He talked about being a father constantly, helped me set up the nursery, and went to every doctor's appointment. I thought we were building something beautiful together. What I didn't know was that his ex-girlfriend from college, Melissa, had been battling stage 4 pancreatic cancer for the past 8 months. David never mentioned her illness to me. I knew about Melissa. They'd dated for 3 years in college and remained friends afterward, but David always described their relationship as ancient history and assured me I had nothing to worry about. The first sign something was wrong came 3 weeks ago when David started getting phone calls at odd hours. He'd step outside to take them, speaking in hushed tones. When I asked about it, he said it was work stuff or family drama. I trusted him completely, so I didn't push. Then, 2 weeks ago, David came home from what he'd said was a business trip looking completely shattered. He sat on our bed and just stared at the wall for an hour. When I asked what was wrong, he finally broke down. Melissa is dying, he said, tears streaming down his face. She has maybe 2 weeks left, 3 at most. The doctors say there's nothing more they can do. I felt terrible for her and for him. Despite their history, I knew David cared about Melissa as a friend. I rubbed his back and told him I was sorry, that if he needed to visit her or support her family, I understood. She asked me to come see her, he said quietly. Just to say goodbye. Of course, I said. You should go. I'll be fine here. David left the next morning to drive to Melissa's hometown, about 4 hours away. He said he'd be back that evening. But evening came and went with no word from him. He finally called around midnight. I'm going to stay another day, he said. She's really bad, Rachel. Worse than I thought. Her family needs support. I was a little confused. David barely knew Melissa's family, but I didn't want to be selfish when someone was dying. Okay, I said. Just keep me updated. But 1 day turned into 3, then 5. David would call sporadically, always with updates about how Melissa was declining and how much his support meant to her family. He started missing my doctor's appointments, which he'd never done before. David, I had the ultrasound today, I said during one of our calls. Oliver's growth is a little behind, and Dr. Martinez wants to see us both next week. That's great, honey, he said distractedly. Listen, I need to go. Melissa's having a really hard day. Did you hear what I said about Oliver? Yeah, everything's fine. I'll be home soon. But he wasn't home soon. A week passed, then another. David would call every few days with updates about Melissa's condition, but he seemed completely disconnected from what was happening with our pregnancy. When I had a scare with bleeding and had to go to the emergency room alone, I called him in tears. David, I'm at the hospital. I was bleeding and Dr. Martinez wants to keep me overnight for observation. Oh, that's tough, he said, but his voice sounded distant. I'm sure everything will be fine though. You're strong. I need you here, I said, crying. I'm scared something's wrong with the baby. I can't leave right now, Rachel. Melissa's in her final days. Her family is counting on me to help with arrangements and things. You'll be okay. The doctors will take care of you. I hung up feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. My husband was choosing a dying ex-girlfriend over his pregnant wife and unborn child. But I told myself grief makes people act strangely, that he'd come home once Melissa passed and we'd work through this together. I was wrong. Last Monday, David called with news that changed everything. Rachel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. Something in his tone made my blood run cold. What's wrong? Melissa asked me to marry her, he said quietly. She doesn't want to die as my ex-girlfriend. She wants to die as my wife. I couldn't breathe. What are you talking about? She's got maybe a week left, possibly less. She said the only thing that would give her peace is knowing we finished what we started in college. That we got the ending we were supposed to have before cancer took it away. David, what are you saying? I'm saying yes, he said, his voice getting stronger. I'm going to marry her. Just for a few days, until she passes. Then I'll come home to you and Oliver. The room started spinning. You're going to marry someone else? While I'm pregnant with your child? It's not like that, David said quickly. It's not a real marriage. It's giving a dying woman peace. It's the right thing to do. The right thing to do? I was screaming now. The right thing to do is be here with your pregnant wife. The right thing to do is not marry your ex-girlfriend. Rachel, please try to understand. Our baby isn't going anywhere. Oliver will be here when I get back. But Melissa, she's dying. Her time is running out. Our baby could be here any day, I sobbed. I'm 34 weeks pregnant with complications. What if something happens while you're playing house with your ex? Nothing's going to happen, David said dismissively. You're being dramatic. Oliver isn't due for 6 weeks, and first babies are always late anyway. Melissa will be gone in a few days, and then everything will go back to normal. Normal? You think anything will ever be normal after you marry someone else? It's just a piece of paper, David said, getting frustrated. It doesn't mean anything except giving her peace. Why can't you be supportive of that? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Because I'm your wife. Because we're about to have a baby together. Because you're supposed to be here with me, not planning a wedding with your dying ex. You're being selfish, David said coldly. Melissa is dying, Rachel. She's actually dying, and all you can think about is yourself. I'm thinking about our marriage. I'm thinking about our son. Our son will be fine. You'll be fine. But Melissa won't be fine unless I do this for her. She needs me right now more than you do. That sentence broke something inside me. She needs you more than your pregnant wife needs you? Yes, David said without hesitation. Because she's dying and you're not. I hung up and called my sister immediately. When I told her what David was planning, she was silent for a long moment. Rachel, she said slowly, you understand that what he's describing is completely insane, right? Like, actually crazy? I don't know what to think anymore, I sobbed. He's abandoning his pregnant wife to marry his ex-girlfriend. There's no universe where that's okay, dying or not. But David had already made his decision. The next morning, he called to tell me the wedding was scheduled for Friday. Friday? I choked out. This Friday? As in, 3 days from now? The doctors don't think she has much longer, he said. We can't wait. What about me? What about Oliver? I told you, you'll both be fine. I'll be back early next week, and we can put this whole thing behind us. Put this behind us? David, you're marrying someone else. For like 4 days. Then she'll die and it'll be over. The casual way he talked about her death, like it was just an inconvenience to get through, made me sick. But what made me sicker was the realization that he genuinely didn't see anything wrong with what he was doing. Wednesday night, I started having contractions. They were irregular at first, so I timed them and waited to see if they'd settled down. When they didn't, I called my doctor. Mrs. Thompson, given your complications, I think you should come in to be monitored, Dr. Martinez said. How far apart are the contractions? About 8 minutes, I said, trying to stay calm. Come in now. And where's your husband? I started crying. He's not available. When I got to the hospital, the contractions were getting stronger and more regular. Dr. Martinez examined me and her face went serious. Rachel, you're 3 centimeters dilated and fully effaced. This baby is coming tonight. No, I said, panicking. No, he's not due for 6 weeks. David isn't here. He can't come tonight. I'm sorry, honey, but Oliver has other plans. We need to call your husband immediately. With shaking hands, I called David. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, in labor. Hospital. Need you now. An hour passed with no response. My contractions were getting stronger, and I was terrified. I called David's phone 12 more times. Finally, around 2 a.m., he texted back, can't come. At wedding venue doing rehearsal stuff. You'll be fine. Hospitals have doctors. I showed the text to Dr. Martinez, and the look on her face will haunt me forever. Did your husband just say he can't come to the birth of his child because he's at a wedding rehearsal? She asked carefully. I nodded, sobbing too hard to speak. For someone else's wedding? His ex-girlfriend's, I managed to get out. He's marrying his ex-girlfriend tomorrow because she's dying. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Rachel, I've been delivering babies for 20 years, and I have never heard anything so heartless in my life. Oliver arrived at 6:47 a.m. on Friday morning, exactly when David was supposed to be walking down the aisle with Melissa. He weighed 4 pounds, 3 ounces, and had to go straight to the NICU because of his prematurity. I held my tiny son and cried harder than I'd ever cried in my life. Not just because he was early and fragile, but because the man who was supposed to be there to welcome him into the world was busy marrying someone else. At 10:15 a.m., as I was trying to pump breast milk for Oliver, David texted me a photo. It was him and Melissa at their wedding. She was in a wheelchair, attached to an oxygen tank, wearing a simple white dress. David was in a suit I'd never seen before, smiling down at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The message read, "We did it. She's so happy. How are things there?" I turned off my phone and asked the nurse to make sure no calls were put through to my room. Update 1. Melissa died 6 hours after their wedding ceremony. David called me around 4 p.m., sobbing. "She's gone," he cried. "Melissa's gone. She died holding my hand, as my wife. She was so peaceful, Rachel. She said marrying me was the happiest moment of her life." I listened to him cry about his dead wife while our premature son fought for his life in the NICU. "David," I said quietly when he finished, "I gave birth to your son this morning." Silence. Then, "What? But he's not due for 6 weeks." "I know. But he came anyway. Last night. While you were at your wedding rehearsal." "Oh my God," David breathed. "Is he okay? Are you okay?" "He's in the NICU. He's 4 pounds, 3 ounces. He's alive, but it's touch and go." "I'll come right now," David said. "I'll drive straight there." "Don't," I said. "What do you mean, don't? He's my son." "You made your choice, David. When I needed you most, when our son needed you most, you chose her. You chose to marry someone else instead of being here for the birth of your child." "That's not fair," David said, his voice getting defensive. "Melissa was dying. Our son is alive." "Our son was also dying, David. He came 6 weeks early with complications, and I had to deliver him alone because you were too busy playing husband to your ex-girlfriend." "You're making it sound like I chose her over him," David protested. "You did choose her over him," I said simply. "You chose her over both of us. You married her while I was in labor with your child." David was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that destroyed whatever was left of my heart. "She needed me more than you did. She was dying alone. I was giving birth alone." "That's different." "How is that different?" "Because birth is natural. Women do it all the time. But dying is final? I couldn't give her back her life, but I could give her a peaceful death. At the expense of our son's birth." "He'll have other birthdays," David said, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "Melissa only had one chance to die married to me." I hung up the phone and called my lawyer. 3 days later, David showed up at the hospital. I was in the NICU with Oliver, who was finally stable but still on oxygen support. "Rachel," David said softly from the doorway. "He's so small." "Premature babies usually are," I said without looking at him. David approached Oliver's incubator carefully. Can I touch him?" "You can try. He doesn't like strangers." David's face crumpled. "I'm not a stranger. I'm his father." "Where were you when he was born?" I asked quietly. "You know where I was." "Say it out loud, David. Tell me where you were when your son came into the world." David was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he whispered, "I was getting married to someone else." "That's right. So yes, you are a stranger to him. Because when he needed his father most, his father was busy being someone else's husband." David started crying. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Melissa was so scared of dying alone. So you let me give birth alone instead. I didn't think he'd come early. But he did. And where were you?" David couldn't answer that. We both knew where he'd been. "I want a divorce," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Rachel, please. Let me explain." "Explain what?" "That you married your ex-girlfriend while I was in labor? That you chose her death over our son's birth? That you sent me a wedding photo while I was pumping breast milk for our premature baby?" David looked stricken. "You saw the photo?" "I saw it. You looked very happy." "It wasn't like that," David said desperately. "It was just. I was trying to make her happy in her final hours. And I was trying not to die giving birth to your son in my final hours of labor. But you weren't there for that." "I'm here now," David said weakly. 3 days too late. I called security to have David removed from the NICU. When the guards arrived, David looked at me with desperation. "Please don't do this," he begged. "I made a mistake. I see that now. But she's dead, Rachel. It's over. We can move forward." "You're right," I said. "She's dead. Your wife is dead. And now your marriage to me is dead too." As security escorted David out, he called back to me, "You can't keep me from my son." "Watch me," I said. Update 2. The divorce proceedings have been brutal, but not in the way I expected. David has been trying to paint himself as a grieving widower who made one mistake out of compassion. His lawyer argued that David's decision to marry Melissa was an act of mercy for a dying woman and shouldn't be held against him in family court. They claimed I was being vindictive and using Oliver to punish David for showing kindness to someone in their final moments. My lawyer destroyed that narrative in about 5 minutes. "Your Honor," she said, "Mr. Thompson didn't just show kindness to a dying woman. He abandoned his high-risk pregnant wife, missed the birth of his premature son, and married another woman while his wife was in labor. This wasn't mercy, this was abandonment of his most fundamental responsibilities as a husband and father." The judge was clearly disgusted by David's actions. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "I presided over many custody cases, but I have never encountered a situation where a father chose to marry someone else during the birth of his child. Can you explain to me how you thought this was appropriate?" David's lawyer had clearly coached him, because he gave some prepared speech about honoring the dying and showing compassion in final moments. But then the judge asked a follow-up question that his lawyer hadn't prepared him for. "Mr. Thompson, when you took your wedding vows to Ms. Melissa, did you promise to forsake all others?" David went pale. Yes, Your Honor." "So you promised to forsake all others, including your pregnant wife and unborn child, to a woman you knew was dying?" "It wasn't meant to be permanent," David stammered. "But in that moment, when you made those vows, you were choosing her over your family. Is that correct?" David couldn't answer that question without condemning himself either way. The judge awarded me full custody with supervised visitation for David. "I cannot in good conscience grant unsupervised access to a man who has demonstrated such poor judgment and lack of commitment to his parental responsibilities," she said. But the real vindication came from an unexpected source, Melissa's family. 2 weeks after the custody hearing, I received a call from Melissa's sister, Sarah. "Rachel? This is Sarah Mitchell, Melissa's sister. I hope it's okay that I'm calling." "Of course," I said, though I was confused about why she'd want to talk to me. "I wanted to apologize," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "For what David did. For what my sister asked him to do." I was quiet, not sure how to respond. "The thing is," Sarah continued, "Melissa knew about you. She knew you were pregnant. She knew you were high risk. And she asked him to marry her anyway." My blood went cold. "What?" "She'd been following your social media for months. She knew everything about your pregnancy, your due date, your complications. When she asked David to marry her, she knew there was a chance you'd go into labor during their wedding. I felt sick. She knew? She said if David really loved her, he'd choose her over anyone else, even his pregnant wife. She said it was the ultimate test of his devotion." I had to sit down. "Are you telling me this was all planned? That she deliberately tried to make him choose between us?" "I'm so sorry," Sarah sobbed. "I tried to talk her out of it. I told her it was wrong, that you were innocent in all this. But she was dying, and she was bitter about David moving on with his life. She wanted to know that she still came first for him. And David knew this? I think he convinced himself it was about giving her peace. But yes, he knew she was asking him to choose. And he chose her." After Sarah hung up, I sat in Oliver's nursery and cried. Not just because David had abandoned us, but because it had been calculated. Melissa had deliberately orchestrated a situation where David would have to choose between his dying ex and his pregnant wife, and David had made his choice. When I told my lawyer about Sarah's call, she immediately filed a motion to terminate David's visitation rights entirely. "This wasn't a moment of poor judgment," she argued in court. "This was a deliberate choice to abandon his family for another woman, made with full knowledge that his wife might go into labor while he was marrying someone else." The judge was even more appalled by this revelation. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "you were aware that your ex-girlfriend was asking you to choose between her and your pregnant wife?" David's new lawyer, he'd fired the first one after the custody disaster, tried to object, but David answered anyway. "She was dying," he said quietly. I thought I could do both. Be there for her and still be there for Rachel and the baby. But when forced to choose, you chose your ex-girlfriend over your wife and child." "I thought the baby wouldn't come yet," David said weakly. "That's not what I asked, Mr. Thompson. When forced to choose between your dying ex-girlfriend and your pregnant wife, you chose your ex-girlfriend. Yes or no?" David was quiet for a long moment. Then, barely audibly, "Yes." "And you married this other woman while your wife was in labor?" "Yes." "And you sent your wife a wedding photo while she was caring for your premature infant?" I was happy that Melissa got her wish before she died. I wanted to share that." The judge stared at David for a full minute. Then she said, "Mr. Thompson, in 30 years on this bench, I have never encountered such a fundamental failure of character. Visitation is terminated permanently. You may file for reconsideration when the child turns 18. David broke down completely. "Please," he sobbed. "He's my son. I love him." You should have thought about that before you married someone else during his birth, the judge said coldly. Update 3. It's been 6 months since Oliver was born, and 4 months since David's visitation rights were terminated. Oliver is thriving now, he's caught up to his expected weight and is hitting all his developmental milestones. He's the happiest baby, always smiling and babbling, completely unaware of the drama that surrounded his birth. David has tried to contact me several times, mostly through intermediaries since I have a restraining order against direct contact. His mother called me last week, begging me to reconsider. He made a terrible mistake, she said, crying. But he's learned from it. He's in therapy now, trying to understand why he made such a poor choice. Mrs. Thompson, I said gently, I'm glad David is getting help. But he didn't make a mistake, he made a choice. When faced with choosing between his dying ex-girlfriend and his pregnant wife, he chose her. That's not a mistake you learn from, it's a fundamental character flaw. But Oliver needs his father, she protested. Oliver needs protection from a father who would abandon him for another woman, I replied. David already proved that when push comes to shove, Oliver isn't his priority. David also tried to reach me through Sarah, Melissa's sister, which was particularly twisted. He asked me to tell you that he understands now how wrong he was, Sarah told me when she called. He says he was manipulated by Melissa, that she took advantage of his grief and guilt to make him do something he never would have done otherwise. Do you believe that? I asked. Sarah was quiet for a moment. I think Melissa was manipulative, yes. But I also think a man who truly loved his wife and wanted to be a father wouldn't have been manipulatable in that way. My sister could only take advantage of feelings that were already there. She was right. Melissa hadn't hypnotized David or held a gun to his head. She'd simply offered him a choice between his past and his future, and he'd chosen his past. The most disturbing contact came through my own sister, who called me in tears last month. Rachel, David came to see me today, she said, sobbing. He begged me to convince you to let him see Oliver. What did you tell him? I told him he was insane for even asking. But Rachel, he looks terrible. He's lost so much weight, and he seems genuinely broken up about everything. Good, I said without hesitation. That's not like you, my sister said carefully. You're not usually vindictive. I'm not being vindictive, I explained. I'm being protective. David chose another woman over his son once, and he could do it again. What happens the next time someone needs him more than Oliver does? What happens when David finds another girlfriend who demands to come first? My sister couldn't argue with that logic. The truth is, I don't hate David. I feel sorry for him. He threw away his marriage, his relationship with his son, and his reputation for a woman who used him to get revenge on his new life. Melissa got exactly what she wanted. She destroyed our marriage from beyond the grave and ensured that David would be miserable forever. But my pity for David doesn't override my responsibility to protect Oliver. My son deserves better than a father who would abandon him for another woman's deathbed wishes. I've started dating someone new, a pediatric nurse named James who I met during one of Oliver's follow-up appointments. James understands that Oliver comes first, always and without question. When I told him about David and Melissa, he said something that really stuck with me. A real man doesn't abandon his pregnant wife for anyone, under any circumstances. I don't care if it's his dying mother, his dying ex, or the Pope himself. You stand by your wife and child, period. That's the kind of man I want in Oliver's life, someone who understands that family means loyalty, not conditional support that disappears when things get complicated. Final update. Last week, I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a letter from David and a small wooden toy truck that he'd apparently made in some kind of woodworking class. The letter was 20 pages long, detailing his regrets, his therapy sessions, and his desperate desire to be part of Oliver's life. He wrote about how he'd realized that Melissa had manipulated him, how he'd been grieving their college relationship rather than thinking clearly about his current family. I know I can never undo what I did, he wrote. I know I can never take back the fact that I wasn't there when Oliver was born. But I want to spend the rest of my life making it up to both of you. I want to be the father Oliver deserves and the man you thought you married. The letter went on to describe his therapy revelations about how he'd never properly grieved his relationship with Melissa, how her cancer diagnosis had brought up unresolved feelings, and how he'd let those feelings cloud his judgment about what was truly important. But then, in the middle of all his self-reflection and apologies, David wrote something that showed me he still didn't understand what he'd done. I know you think I chose Melissa over you and Oliver, but it wasn't that simple. She was dying, Rachel. How could I say no to a dying woman's last wish? How could I live with myself knowing I'd let her die alone and afraid when I could have given her peace? There it was, the same justification, the same self-pity, the same inability to understand that his first loyalty should have been to his wife and child. I threw the letter away without finishing it. But I kept the toy truck, Not for sentimental reasons, but as evidence. Because someday, when Oliver is old enough to ask about his father, I'll show him that truck and explain that his father made it in a woodworking class instead of being present for his son's first months of life. Oliver is 8 months old now and has no memory of David. When he looks around our house, he sees photos of me, my family, James, and our chosen family of friends who showed up when we needed them. He doesn't see photos of the man who married someone else during his birth. James and I have been talking about the future, about potentially moving in together and maybe even marriage down the line. Oliver adores James, reaching for him when he cries and giggling when James makes funny faces. It's the kind of relationship I always imagined David would have with his son. Do you think David will ever stop trying to contact you? James asked me the other night as we watched Oliver play with his blocks. Probably not, I said. But it doesn't matter. Oliver has everything he needs without him. And what about you? Do you have everything you need? I looked at my healthy, happy son, then at the man who'd chosen to love us both unconditionally, and I realized I did. I have more than I need, I told him. I have a son who will grow up knowing his worth isn't conditional on other people's convenience. And I have someone who understands that love means showing up, especially when it's hard. David made his choice on the day Oliver was born. He chose a dying woman's comfort over his son's first breath, and that choice will define him for the rest of his life. But I made my choice too. I chose Oliver's future over David's regrets. And unlike David's choice, mine is one I'll never have reason to regret. My son will grow up knowing that his mother fought for him from his very first day, that she chose his well-being over everything else, and that real love doesn't come with conditions or expiration dates. David can keep his wooden toys and his therapy revelations. Oliver and I have something better. We have each other, and we have people who would never ask us to choose between love and loyalty. Because in a real family, you never have to choose.